Alright, so let's say you're new to the world of knives. Collecting them, sharpening them, using them, or whatever. Right? And you are seeing all sorts of different kind of knives that are being put out there by a lot of different brands, and you're wondering what all the differences are. I'm gonna start from the beginning, the knife anatomy, and just break it down for you so that it's really easy to understand. Here we have a kitchen knife, okay, and the principles here really apply to folding knives as well. Okay, so generally speaking, this part, the steel part that goes into the handle, is called a tang. The handle is called a handle. Yeah, the bottom of the handle is called a butt. Now the actual knife part, there's a couple different aspects to it. So obviously the front of it is called a tip, and that's great for piercing and starting of the cuts. Top part of the knife is called the spine. This is obviously the edge. This part where the knife ends and where the handle starts, this is called the heel of the knife. This area is called the ricasso, and that's where you will see the plunge grinds. So I'll grab a knife to show you an example in real life. So here's one that's working in progress, as in I don't know if I'll ever finish this, but this is a nakiri. A wa handle is gonna go over this tang. This part, the ricasso, this is the plunge grind, where it goes from the flat of the top of the blade. Right, so the blades usually have a flat part, and the bevel, as well as a secondary. And I'll explain all that when we look at it from more of a cutaway point of view. Alright, so I've got here 3 different types of knives. So this is a puko. It's actually a carving knife, as in carving wood. So on this knife, there is not a pronounced plunge or a ricasso, because the edge terminates all the way up to the handle. The part where it tapers off, I'm gonna oil this thing clearly, part where it tapers off, that is your grind. Obviously I'm gonna use one of my own knives for demonstration. Here where it goes from the flat to the bevel, okay, so this part where it tapers into the grind is called the bevel. That this specific area, okay, is called a plunge. That plunge grind makes or breaks for a lot of different makers, and this whole area is called a ricasso. The area where the pivot is called a tang on a folding knife, right? So like a full fixed blade, the tang doesn't go all the way through the handle like most of them. Well, this is very rusty, but yeah, on this knife the tang goes all the way through to the back of the handle, like on most fixed blades. Right, here's just another example. On here, plunge is a little harder to see, but it's, the plunge grind is actually inside of the handle when it's opened up, and it's completely hidden. So obviously on a flat stock of metal, like how most knives are grinded out from, is going to be square shaped. Right, so here's another one. So if you look at it from the front, just ignore the initial grind here, it is just a completely rectangular shape in its cross section. So when you grind out the knife shape, you take out both sides on most grinds to create a taper like that, to bring it to the edge. If I just really zoom in on this, we have our primary grind. Most knives will be ground, the primary grind will not finish at a complete tip. Okay, the reason for that is because if you do, you will have issues with chipping as well as warping when you are heat treating the blade. So it will usually, at the end of manufacturing, will look more like this. Now obviously this wedge cannot cut. Well, it can, I suppose, if you force it through some pudding, it can cut the pudding. but this wedge cannot cut. Alright, so on here, instead of after heat treat, instead of grinding it down all the way to an edge, we just create a secondary bevel at the end to bring it to a complete edge. So you have three facets here: the flats, the primary grind, secondary bevel, edge, whatever you want to call it. So when we talk about the different knife grinds, generally speaking, we're talking about the primary grind. Okay, you can have different knife secondary bevels, but it's not very common. I know there are guys who will sharpen their secondary bevels to make convexes, to make it harder to chip and stuff like that, but that's not very common. Most people will do it on a flat stone. Anyway, so looking at the different knife grinds, here are the common blade shapes you'll see, and this is all sort of cut away halfway through the knife. So the first one you will have, this is either called a saber grind or a flat grind, and this is a type of grind that you see very often on most blades, where the grind doesn't go all the way to the spine, but it is flat and tapers down to an edge. These types of grinds usually have excellent durability. It will hold up very well to chopping as well as penetrations when you're using the tip. Most EDC knives will be just fine with a flat grind. For general use, it's a great grind. The only issue is because it doesn't taper all the way to the top, you can see it creates more of a distinctive wedge. So therefore it's not as good as seamlessly gliding through material when you're cutting. The sister, or the brother edge of that, will be the full flat grind. As you can see, it's just like the saber grind, except it goes all the way to the top. So instead of stopping and having a bit of a flat at the top, the grind would continue all the way to the top and create less of a pronounced wedge. So you can think of it like if both blades had the same thickness and stock, a full flat grind will obviously have a thinner edge. So therefore it will cut much easier, but because it is also thinner, they can be more prone to chipping, but not as bad as hollow grind. Full flat grinds are, generally speaking, a very usable grind, and a lot of Spydercos will use them, and they have excellent slicing ability. The next grind is a hollow grind. Now what? Why is that knife so much shorter? Anyway, a hollow grind is done using a wheel. So a wheel comes in and it caves out a concave grind into the blade. The benefit of that is regardless of blade stock thickness, you can have a very thin grind behind the edge. Okay, now hollow grinds are amazing when it comes to sliceability. However, they do lose out in terms of edge strength as well as a sort of edge stability in a way, because they are very thin behind the edge, or they can be made very thin behind the edge very easily, and don't have a lot of support behind them like these other grinds. They can chip. They're not for like chopping knives generally, but you know that they are great for making things sharp, because almost all straight razors use a hollow grind. Next is a chisel grind. It's pretty much like a saber grind, or it could even be a full flat grind, except only one side of the blade is beveled. They're great if you have to cut against something, but say for example like a carpet knife against a wall, except depending on the side that the grind is on, they're pretty much left or right-handed knife only. You'll also find a lot of Japanese kitchen knives with a chisel grind, with a deep hollow grind on the back, so they'll look something like this. And the reason for that is so you can put your fingers right up against the blade and chop, and then the food falls off that way instead of going on both sides of the blade. The other one is a convex grind. So what this is as like a reverse hollow grind. Convex. Generally, they don't make for great slicers, but they can take a ton of abuse because the bevels are rounded out like that, so they have so much more support behind the bevel than all the other grinds will. Right, so you often find them on axes, bushcraft knives, as well as machetes and things like that, and they take a ton of abuse, but they're pretty hard to sharpen properly without taking out the convex. Lastly is the Scandi grind, and Scandi grinds kind of look like saber grinds, except unlike a saber grind, the whole bevel, okay, is the cutting edge. Instead of having a primary and a secondary edge, you just have a secondary edge straight from the spine. Okay, see right there. So from the spine, it just comes down to complete cutting edge. There are other grinds. Generally speaking, they're called nightmare grinds because they're a nightmare to maintain and make and also look at. And what they usually are compound grinds of several different types of grinds on a single bevel. Right, in terms of knife shape, you have a few. So you got drop points where the point drops from the top of where the spine is and creates a very strong tip and a bit of a belly, and they're a very just good general purpose knife. You have a clip point where the top has been clipped, and they usually have a very strong tip as well as a very usable belly. You've also got spear points. They're like drop points but have a secondary edge on the back. They're generally as strong as drop points but also have more piercing power. You've got tantos. I don't have one to show. Actually, I do have that rusty one. So a tanto will have a very strong tip, not a very good slicer because they usually have absolutely no belly. They do have a long straight edge. They also tend to have a double bevel where they have a hollow grind on the long edge and a flat grind on the top edge, and this one makes them very strong. Excuse the rust. I never took it off after forging. There's sheep's foot like these, and they make for a very good letter openers, dragging and slicing against stuff, box openers and things like that. Wandcliffs are like sheep's foot but have a pointy tip. They're all very much usable blade shapes, but for most people a drop point or a nice Wandcliff will do you good for most tasks that you're doing. I hope you enjoyed this impromptu video. Hope it all made sense. Subscribe if you want to see videos about random stuff at absolutely 0 intervals for when videos come out. And like and comment what's your favorite kind of grind and what's your favorite kind of knife shape.